Have you ever heard about the scientific experiment that went so spectacularly wrong, the test subjects actually ended up plotting to murder the scientist in charge? Well, that's exactly what happened in 1973. A scientist set out to study violence by basically creating a perfect storm for it on a tiny raft. This is the unbelievable true story of the Acali, a vessel the world would soon call the Sex Raft. Okay, so to really get this, you've got to picture the time. It's 1973. The Vietnam War is still fresh in everyone's minds, and people are seriously grappling with this big question of human aggression. This experiment, it tapped right into that nerve. The media, of course, went absolutely wild for it. I mean, just look at this poster for the documentary they made. It promises the strangest group experiment of all time. And you know what? They really weren't kidding. So here's the central mystery, right? The whole point of the experiment was to spark conflict among the participants. But the only really serious, life-threatening conflict that actually happened was between the participants and the guy running the whole show. How on earth does a peace experiment end with a murder plot? Let's get into it. To really understand what happened out there, we need to get inside the mind of the man who cooked this all up. A brilliant but, let's say, controversial Mexican anthropologist named Santiago Genovés. He had a very, very specific idea in his head.
On paper, Genovés's research question sounded pretty noble, didn't it? He wanted to figure out the roots of human violence, supposedly to help create a more peaceful world. His method, though? Well, it was to build a floating powder keg, a tiny version of all the world's tensions, just to see what it would take to make it explode.
So while Genovés was calling this his peace project, you can bet the international press saw something else entirely. They saw young, attractive men and women totally isolated at sea, and the headlines basically wrote themselves. They nicknamed it the Sex Raft. And honestly, that's the name that has stuck for half a century. Now, what's so fascinating here is that Genovés was not just a passive observer. Not at all. He was an active pot stirrer. He meticulously designed his experiment to create as much friction as possible. He literally had a recipe for disaster.
And here it is, his formula. First off, he handpicked what he himself called sexually attractive people. Then he mixed up nationalities and religions, hoping that would create some tension. And here's the real kicker. He put women in all the key leadership positions, even making a woman the captain. Why? He specifically wanted to see if the men would try to challenge female authority in a survival situation. I mean, he was lighting fuses all over the place.
And this was their entire world. The Acali Raft was basically engineered for maximum psychological pressure. It was tiny, with no engine, which meant they were totally at the mercy of the ocean. And privacy? It was non-existent. The sleeping cabin was so small they were in constant physical contact. And get this, even the toilet was right out there in the open. There was absolutely no escape from each other. Just to give you a sense of the scale here, we're talking about a 101-day journey, an entire crossing of the Atlantic Ocean. They set off from the Canary Islands in May and wouldn't see land again until they drifted into Mexico in August. That's over 3 months of complete and utter isolation. So, Genovés had set the stage perfectly for a drama of aggression, jealousy, and conflict. He was basically expecting a real-life Lord of the Flies. But what he got was something else entirely, and it drove him absolutely crazy. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. It was a spectacular failure of his hypothesis. Every single thing he thought would lead to violence did the exact opposite. Instead of fighting over partners, the crew bonded. The little society he built didn't collapse. It actually thrived, with everyone supporting each other against the real enemy, the ocean. Yeah, the crew figured out how to get along. They dealt with the boredom and the stress by singing songs, telling stories, and just working together. A few people even pair off, no drama. But there was no fighting. And for Genovés, this piece was a total disaster. His experiment was failing. So he decided to stop just watching and start provoking. And this is where the story takes a really dramatic turn. When the crew wouldn't fight each other, Genovés decided he was going to force them to. And in doing that, he made one huge mistake. He gave them all a common enemy, himself. This quote from Faye Seymour, an American engineer who was on the raft, just captures the shift perfectly. Genovés went from scientist to straight-up dictator. He started using these really manipulative psychological tactics to try and break the group's spirit, to force the conflict that he so desperately wanted to see. His first major move was just jaw-dropping. He'd had everyone fill out these intensely personal questionnaires.
Then, to try and spark jealousy and paranoia, he gathered them all together and read their secret answers out loud. Answers to questions like, who are you most sexually attracted to on this raft, and who annoys you the most? It was an insane breach of trust.
But when even that didn't work, he made his most desperate move yet. He publicly undermined and basically staged a coup against the raft's captain, a Swedish woman named Maria Bjornstam. This was the final straw. He had put her in charge just to see if the men would challenge her, and when they didn't, he tried to tear her down himself. It backfired, spectacularly.
And this is where the story gets really chilling. The crew, now completely united against Genovés, held a secret meeting on the roof of the cabin. They calmly talked about what to do about their Genovés problem, and they seriously debated murdering him. They talked about two ways to do it, either with a poison-filled syringe or just pushing him overboard during a storm. They even had a plan where everyone would touch the needle so they'd all be equally guilty and no one could talk. This was very, very real.
So let's just pause on that for a second. The only time the experiment ever got close to deadly violence was when the subjects were plotting to eliminate the manipulative scientist who was trying to provoke them into being violent. The real discovery here had nothing to do with aggression.
But instead of murder, the crew chose a different kind of mutiny. They confronted Genovés as a group. They told him, calmly, that he was no longer in charge, and they took control of the raft themselves. Their solidarity, which was forged in their opposition to him, was way stronger than any of his little games. And they finished that dangerous journey as a real, unified team.
So, what was the final score of this whole thing? Well, the number of violent fights between the crew members, the very thing he was there to study, was a big, fat 0. A complete and total failure on that front.
But the number of mutinies instigated against the lead scientist? 1. The experiment did produce conflict, all right? It just turned out that the real source of aggression on the raft was the man who was looking so hard to find it in everybody else.
So in the end, the Acali experiment proved absolutely nothing about our natural instinct for war. Scientifically, it was a bust. But as a story, wow. It's this incredible testament to something else entirely. Our capacity to cooperate, our resilience, and our ability to unite, especially when we're facing a common threat.
And that kind of leaves us with this one big fascinating thought, doesn't it? Genovés set out on a mission to prove how easily we all turn into savages. But what he may have accidentally demonstrated is that our default setting, even under the most extreme pressure you can imagine, might just be to figure out a way to get along.